looks like some cards. And Adam, could you run back to the resource room and see if you can find the box that has the cards in it?
We got maps.
Y'all got maps? Okay. All right. Anybody else? Okay. All right, here's a map. Y'all can share that. Y'all got maps already? You have a map? All right. Y'all both need maps? Okay. No, they're New Testament now. Adam's going to go see if he can't run down those decks of cards. All right. So, let's see, Brian, could you hit that HDMI button? Sorry, I meant to do that when I was back there, and I got distracted. I know that's shocking, right? Okay. Let's see. Okay. So on Sunday, we talked about the wise men and Nazareth. Awesome. Thank you, sir. We talked about the wise men and Jesus living in Nazareth and how Jesus escaped to Egypt because of Herod's plot to kill Jesus. And we talked a lot about some of the details surrounding Jesus' early life. You remember we talked about when he was 12, he went to the temple, and some of the implications of that. We also kind of did some theorizing, I guess, or just kind of spoke in terms of conjecture about, maybe what Jesus' upbringing would have been like. Of course, there's a lot about Jesus' upbringing that we don't know, right? I mean, there's effectively, you could say 29 hidden years in there if you could string what we do know from his early years as a year. Did you find some? Okay, raise your hand if you need a set of cards, and Adam's going to bring you some. Okay. We may have to share amongst couples if we can. All right, that looks perfect. I think you got just enough. All right. So, we just kind of theorized about what Jesus' life would have been like as a young boy and maybe some of the things he would have experienced as he grew up in Nazareth, which of course was Jesus' hometown. I've got another video for us to watch today, and I don't necessarily think that we will get through the whole thing. If I started it now, I'd probably take up the rest of the class, and there's some stuff I want to mention. Just kind of briefly. I do want to say I'm not really in a hurry to get through this class. I want to take our time. If we don't get through the whole thing, we don't get through the whole thing. That's the way it is. Somebody told me Sunday morning I was like running 100 miles an hour during class because I was trying to get everything in before the video. So I'll try not to do that so much tonight. All right, just for a few moments, I want us to move on from card number 5 to card number 6. Those of you who just got maps and cards, the maps are going to be included some things we're going to talk about today. And you'll need to keep that map deck with you, the booklet that has the maps, because in there is just a wealth of information as far as geography is concerned. And I'll be referencing that little booklet so I don't have to keep running back to other parts of the PowerPoint. Okay, card number 6. Here's our question. Where did John the Baptist preach? Not everybody at once. There we go. He preached in the wilderness of Judea. The wilderness of Judea. Now, we're going to get to this card probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks about how the Holy Land, Jerusalem, Israel, that whole kind of curved area right there that we see most of the Bible taking place in, that's broken up into a number of different sections. And you've got a map that kind of outlines that here. Let's see. This is the map that kind of outlines it. It's a zoomed out version. I think that's on page 1 of your little map booklet. But nonetheless, what you have in the area where John the Baptist would have preached would be the area that's in the circle. Judea is the area where Jesus spent the latter half of his ministry. So when we get to more of Jesus' ministry, I'll kind of break that down. But Jesus had what is called the Galilean ministry, and then he had what's called the Judean ministry, or the Judean, I guess, depending on how you pronounce that. The Galilean ministry is like around the Sea of Galilee. The Judean is down like in Jerusalem, and this area you see right here. Bethany, when he would go see Mary and Martha and Lazarus, so they lived in Bethany. The last week of Jesus' life, he stayed in Bethany and would travel into Jerusalem. You remember when he cursed the fig tree and he cleansed the temple and all that kind of stuff. So Jesus spent time in both of these areas. Jesus himself grew up in Nazareth, which is just a little bit north of the top of our screen here. Just a little bit north of that, but you can see it on your zoomed out map. And John the Baptist preached in this wilderness of Judea. Now, John the Baptist and Jesus were cousins. We know very little about them, but we do know this. We do know that they met before John the Baptist started preaching. If you'll remember, Jesus and John the Baptist met when they were both in the womb. And that's Luke chapter 1, verses 41 through 44. If you remember when Mary, who just found out she was pregnant with the Holy Spirit, with Jesus from the Holy Spirit, she came to visit Elizabeth, who was 6 months pregnant with John the Baptist. And when she came up, you remember what John did in his mother's womb? What did he do? He jumped, right? The baby jumped when she was pregnant because Jesus had come near. Now, I think that's pretty amazing. I also want to point out, I always try to find a time to fit this kind of stuff in. Jesus and John the Baptist were Jesus and John the Baptist before they were ever born into this world. They were Jesus and John the Baptist in the womb because they were conceived there. You know, as Christians, because we believe what the Bible teaches, we believe that life begins at conception. Life isn't a clump of cells for a certain amount of time. Life begins at conception. That's when God places a soul into an individual when that child is conceived. Now, I've often joked about this, but when you've got a pregnant woman in the audience, you count her twice in the attendance. Okay? Because there's two of them there. My grandfather used to have this rule that if she hadn't had an ultrasound yet, you counted her 3 times because it might be twins. So, but if we really, if we believe in that idea that life begins at conception, I mean, that's a real idea. And John the Baptist, when he was in his mother's womb, leapt when Jesus came near. I've always thought that was a super interesting point. All right, John the Baptist was what we would call the forerunner of Jesus. Isaiah chapter 40 talks about this one that would come and would prepare the way for Jesus. If you kind of remember some of your historical cultural ideas, like when a king would travel, he'd often have like a road crew that would go before him. Today, what you have is like, say the president's going to come through Georgia. What they're going to do is law enforcement, police officers, firefighters, everybody's going to get together and they're going to set up a route for that president to come through. And they're going to escort him through the city. A king in that day, he would have had a road crew that would have also gone before him. And they would have made sure the road was smooth so that he could travel. That's the term that's used here. John the Baptist was like the road crew that came before Jesus. He was the preparer of the way. And he preached, preparing people for Jesus to come. All right, so John was the forerunner. Now, we talked here about the wilderness of Judea. Really, really interesting. When we think of a wilderness, like if I think, if Eric says he's going to go out in the wilderness, what I think is he's going out like in a really dense forest, right? Like he's going to be out away from civilization, lots of trees, lots of underbrush, very difficult to get through. But the wilderness of this area would have looked a little bit more like this. So when we talk about Jesus and John the Baptist being in the wilderness, it's not necessarily like this lush garden out in the middle of nowhere where there is tons of wildlife and lots of rain, especially in this desert to the east or to the west of Jerusalem and the Dead Sea. They call the Dead Sea for a reason. A lot of stuff in that area looks dead. If you've ever visited there, it looks like there's no life. That's not always the case. It's not just like a desert. Occasionally you'll have some greenery out there. But if you ever travel through the Holy Lands, everything looks dead over there. When you get to Jerusalem, things really start to green up. But everything west of that Dead Sea really looks just dead. Okay? And we'll talk a little bit more about some of those areas as we get further into this class. But this is where John the Baptist preached. Now, it makes sense now that we say he didn't, stay at the Holiday Inn and eat the buffet for breakfast, right? You remember what his life was like. He was nomadic. He was a man that lived out on his own. He was off the grid before off the grid was cool, right? He lived out in the wilderness, and do you remember what was descriptive about his clothing and his diet? What? Right, okay, camel hair. Y'all ever seen a camel, like up close? That's not like, the luscious leather of a cow, right? He's not going to be dressed. Y'all ever seen a camel's knees? They're disgusting. The rest of the camel's just as gross, too. And they stink. Sidon rode one when we went up to the ark. Him and Lizzie rode one, and they smelled bad. And they were just on the back of that thing, okay? So a camel wasn't like the most sought after, clothing, I don't think. But he wore that. What did he eat? Now, I understand the honey thing, okay? I love to go buy the little, bottle of honey they sell at Messer. I think they've got some at the Pig, too, from Ephesus, Georgia. We go through that honey like crazy. Honey's good, okay? Not so sure about locusts. I don't know. I'm not going to throw locusts on the griddle tonight when I get home. That's not my choice. But nonetheless, John the Baptist was a nomadic man. He was a humble man, just like Jesus would have been, of no real royal lineage, okay? Any comments or thoughts about John the Baptist and his preaching in the wilderness? Now, don't worry. We're going to do a quarter next year on the men and women of the Old and New Testament. So when we get there, we'll talk more about maybe what John the Baptist taught and preached. We don't have the time to look at that. But interesting. He was preaching baptism for the remission of sins, baptism of repentance. That's a big question, okay? What did that mean before Jesus died? How is that possible? We'll talk about that when we get to the men and women of the New and Old Testament next year. Any comments about John the Baptist? All right, I'm going to try and leave us a little time to watch this video here at the end. Let's talk about one more card here. Card number 7. Where was Jesus baptized? The Jordan River. Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River. Matthew chapter 3 and verse 13. All right, Jesus' baptism. We learn from Luke chapter 3 and verse 23 that Jesus was about 30 years old. It's in that particular passage that's stated. So you may have asked yourself before, why do we say that Jesus was 30 years old when he began his ministry and then 33 when he died? Well, that's kind of the time frame that we get from the feast days that are mentioned. Luke 3:23 says he was 30 years old when he began his ministry, about 30. And from the calculation of the feast days, we think he did his ministry for 3 years, so about 33 when he died. I've heard a lot of people say that when you hit that, if you're a Christian, when you hit that 33-year-old mark, it's kind of sobering to think about all that Jesus did versus all that you do. I don't know. I'm getting closer there every day, so I'll tell you when I get there. Some of you have been there before, okay? Maybe 33 was not so long ago. Some of you, 33 might be a distant memory, but that's when Jesus died, right? He did all that work in 33 years. It's really 3 years. I mean, if you think about just the ministry aspect of it. Okay, but that Luke 3:23 passage is right after his baptism. Now, when Jesus came to John to be baptized, did John just say like, "Oh yeah, Jesus, I've been waiting to baptize you. I'm so excited to baptize you," or did he say something else? You remember what he said? Yeah, I'm not even worthy to bend down and unstrap your sandals. Now, we learned from John chapter 3 that John the Baptist was he was humble. He knew his purpose. He said he must increase and I must decrease. He understood the principle of what role he played. And he was a humble man when Jesus came up, right? I'm not even worthy to be a servant to Jesus. But nonetheless, Jesus persisted. Now let's ask this question. Why was Jesus baptized? We know what baptism means today, okay? Why was Jesus baptized? To fulfill all righteousness, right? What does that even mean? That Jesus was baptized to fulfill all righteousness.
He did it because it was the right thing to do.
Okay, that's a good answer. He did it because it was the right thing to do. What else?
It's kind of hard for someone to ask somebody to do something they wouldn't do themselves.
Okay. Right, so we talked about that at Jesus' young life. He related to people that were in poorer positions, those that were kind of lesser in society, because he came from that. He understood that. All right.
There was a voice that came down afterwards that said, "This is my beloved son, in whom I'm well pleased."
Mm-hmm.
Because of confirmation, God is pleased
Yeah.
that he was his son.
He was his son. Yeah.
It was a whole master plan too.
Okay. Yeah. The grand scheme. Was it Brother Franklin Camp that made that term so popular? The scheme of redemption. There was a scheme. It was this plan God planned from the beginning of the earth. It was a scheme of redemption, right? So it was this master plan that God had planned out way before anything took place. All right. I've struggled with this question. Okay, I've run round and round about this. Over the years, just in general, there's a lot of questions that's true about. If you look at Psalm 119, 172, you can take your Bibles and jot that passage down and look it up. Essentially, depending on what translation you're looking at, if you're looking through the ESV lens, it's going to say that all of God's commandments are right. The King James Version takes that word right, and it's translated the word righteousness. All God's commandments are righteousness. Now, if we're to take that idea and understand, like for instance in Matthew, I think I have it up here. No, I don't. Matthew 21, that John's baptism, Jesus implies, comes from heaven. So John to baptize was the plan of God, as Sherry pointed out, right? That it was the plan of God, that it was right. That was the right thing that God wanted done. That's what righteousness means. It means to do right. That was what was right according to God. And since that baptism was from heaven, and people are described in the Bible, I think we're actually going to get to this particular story in one of the geography cards. People are described who rejected John's baptism as rejecting God. They actually were rejecting God. Okay? Jesus was dedicated to stay right within the will of God, so he was baptized with John's baptism. I mean, that's what God's plan was. And so Jesus fulfilled that. Some people have posited that Jesus was baptized to begin his ministry. It was as kind of Mike pointed out, it was like this public approval of Jesus as the Son of God. That's what interestingly takes place here and one other time. The only two times that God comes out of the heavens, he breaks that word actually where he opens up, it's like the word break. He breaks open the heavens. And he says, "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased." Does anybody remember the other place that he said that? Right. That's right. The Mount of Transfiguration. Okay. This actually becomes a super important principle in the Gospels. Let me pull these few passages. If you'll see the four passages there at the bottom, the last 2 points, Matthew 3, Matthew 17, 2 Peter 1, and Acts 2:22. This particular event where God comes down out of the sky, he cracks open the sky, the dove and the Spirit, the form of the dove comes down on Jesus in this public approval. The heavens are broken open and God says this. Then at the Mount of Transfiguration, he says that. In the end, he says, "Listen to him," or "Hear ye him." That statement becomes like extremely important, especially for Peter. Now, it would have been very important for Peter because Peter heard it. That's a big moment on the Mount of Transfiguration. Interestingly enough, one of the neat things that I've learned over the years, there's this theory out there that if you remember when Jesus went up on the Mount of Transfiguration, what other two people from the Old Testament were there? Do you remember? Right? Moses and Elijah. A lot of people scholars believe that the Mount of Transfiguration is this Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai, okay, where Moses went up to get the law. And there's a particular instance in the life of Elijah where he goes up on Mount Sinai. They believe that there's this break in what we understand as time, and those individuals, because they're in the presence of God, step into the realm of God, and that when Moses and Elijah stand on that mountain, that's the break in time where they were actually standing on that mountain. And it breaks time to where Peter's standing. Now, that's a theory. But interestingly, that is where God says, "This is my beloved Son." At a time in which you also have a historical moment of the law being given. Okay, so much going on in the Old Testament. There's a thread, even if we don't take that theory to believe anything, there's a thread that runs through the Bible of that moment where God offers down his approval in a covenant form. And it seems that that's being initiated, at least in some way, in Matthew 17 through his approval of Jesus, and then here at Jesus' baptism. Okay. Any questions about Jesus' baptism? Any further points?
Reference to Isaiah 42:1
In Matthew 3.
and Matthew 17:5.
Matthew 17:5. Your Bible cross like footnotes. Isaiah 42:1.
It talks about bringing forth justice to the Gentiles.
Okay, justice to the Gentiles.
Paving the way for the justice for the Gentiles.
Yeah. That's interesting that footnotes that there, because Peter, of course, was one who struggled with that a lot, right? And the one who was sent to Cornelius. That's interesting that that's footnoted there. That Peter was one of the ones that witnessed that.
Talks about the elect one in whom my soul delights.
Yeah.
I put my spirit upon him, and he will bring forth justice to the Gentiles.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. There was a lot of commentators that talked about how the wilderness of Judea played a role in the inclusion of those that were outside of Jewish realm. That's I'll have to chew on that a little bit. That's neat.
Well, to me, Peter, I think, was the one that said it's good for us to be here. Let's build three churches.
Yeah. Three.
One for Moses, the law, the prophets, and Jesus.
Yeah.
And God stopped him in his tracks and said, "No, hear ye him."
Yeah.
And so, in Peter's mind, if three were equal, and God said, "No, Jesus is far above these two." So who can you put?
Wow. Yeah. That's neat. That's a neat way to think about that. I never considered it in that perspective.
Well, John was baptized in the distance of Jesus had been. So it was Peter's the example and or paving the way. There had to be a reason behind it, not just
Well, a lot of people pointed out.
you know how some Bibles have a footnote of prophecy fulfilled. This mine's got a star sentence where it talks about the prophecy back in Isaiah 42.
So, is that Matthew 17 still, or is that Matthew 13? Yeah.
The fulfillment of that prophecy.
Yeah.
Isaiah 42.
Very neat. I like that. Y'all are teaching me stuff here. Miss Sherry?
My question is totally off of that, but we know that John the Baptist was preaching in the wilderness of Judea. Is there any reference or anything to say where or what town or where they were at the time that Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River? Because the Dead Sea is all the way down there to the wilderness of Judea. So is there any reference or anything?
So there's a traditional site, and you can actually go to this place. Now, I've actually got, I got a picture. This is a picture of someone being baptized. This is the Jordan River. This is the traditional site where they believe Jesus was baptized. Now, of course, remember the video from Sunday, what traditional site means, right? I mean, it's just been passed down through history. It could be dead wrong, or it could be dead right. And as they mentioned in that video Sunday, God didn't intend for us to worship a spot necessarily under the new covenant. So there's not really a reference of where that takes place. Now, I do believe, if you go back to this map that I had on, it's on page 1 of yours, the Jordan River runs all the way down into the Dead Sea. So it feeds down into the Dead Sea. So it could be the assumption that they were somewhere here on this top. Let me see if I can zoom this. I can't. They were somewhere here near the top of the Dead Sea, because a lot of that is considered the wilderness of Judea. Like, if you look at historical maps, the wilderness of Judea is the big curved print that just goes across that whole little area. So after Jesus was baptized, what happened? We're going to talk about this Sunday. He was drawn up into the what? To be tempted. He was in the wilderness, right? So a lot of people believe he went to this same wilderness that John the Baptist was in. And so it could be that they were just right here, at the top of the Dead Sea where the Jordan River feeds into it. Okay? Any other questions, thoughts, comments? I promised you we'd watch this video. Give me just a second, we'll get it rolling.
Well, while you're doing that.
Yeah.
Deuteronomy 18, where it's talking about the Levites, the priests, having no inheritance among them, among their brethren. He shall be the priest, these are the people, and those who offer give him, for the Lord your God has chosen him out of the tribes to stand in the ministry of the name of the Lord, him and his sons forever. That's a reference also back to it, where God has chosen him to speak, to go back to what Mike was talking about here in the end.
Yeah. Write that reference down for me. Because I think there's probably a lot more there to do with the Gentiles being included in that than maybe I initially saw. Okay. Let's see. Get this up. And then we can roll. All right, what you're going to see in this video
Can anything good come out of Nazareth?
is like an interesting look at
Those
the early life of
words show the
Jesus.
questionable local reputation of this small village. But God had a plan, and that little town was home to God's greatest gift. Barry, in this episode, we're wanting to focus more on the childhood, the young years of Jesus. So we're wanting to get back up to Nazareth. You know, over in Matthew chapter 2, it explains when they make that move, that Herod died, and behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, "Rise, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead." And he rose and took the child and his mother and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee. And he went and lived in a city called Nazareth, that what was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled. He shall be called a Nazarene. Now, we're not going to be able to go down to Egypt. That's not possible this time. But we do want to get up to Nazareth. What can we go to see something that would have been like what Jesus saw?
Luckily for us, they have created a first-century replica village in Nazareth, complete with buildings and people and animals, and kind of get an idea of what it would have looked like during the first
I would
century.
love to go see that.
Oh, it's a great place to go.
Okay, so we want to go up, we want to go see Nazareth Village, but we also have recorded for us that during the childhood of Jesus, especially around his 12th year, that there was a trip his family made from their hometown in Nazareth back down to Jerusalem to go to the temple. And it was in that instance where he gets left behind and his family actually leaves town, and they end up realizing he's not here, and they end up interacting with Jesus. So we want to talk a little bit about what that would have been like.
We will. Any good Jewish family would have been following the law, and the law required that the family come to Jerusalem 3 times a year for the feast, and that's exactly what we have recorded for us in Luke, the 2nd chapter.
Now, how far are we going to go from Jerusalem up to Nazareth? How far is that?
Oh, there's probably about 60 miles.
How long will it take us to travel that?
Well, for us, in the car, we can do it in actually a couple hours. For them, it would have taken nearly a week.
Nearly a week to go just one way. So 2 weeks for the round trip.
Right.
So I'm really excited to go check out this first century replica city of Nazareth.
Oh, it's a beautiful place, and I think you'll enjoy your visit.
We're in Nazareth Village, here in Nazareth, and there's just a lot to see.
You're right about that. I really enjoy coming to Nazareth Village because it gives you an insight of what cities and towns would have looked like during the first century. Modern day Nazareth is a huge city. It has about 70,000 people. And ancient Nazareth sat in a little bowl in the Galilean hills. A very small town during the time of Jesus. And being able to go to Nazareth Village helps you understand a little bit more about what the city and the buildings and everything would have looked like.
And it's very secluded. It's on the side of a hill. And to walk into the town, they have trees all around the lower sides. For the most part, you feel like you've walked into a time warp because you can look around, and as you look around, it's like modern day Nazareth disappears, which I think is just, it's brilliant. It really helps maintain the atmosphere and the mood. And I really appreciate how they put that together.
Right, every time I come to Israel, I always go to Nazareth Village because it teaches you so many lessons about the first century.
The first thing that we come to at Nazareth Village is a threshing area where they have a donkey and he's got a wooden apparatus behind him threshing out grain and threshing out wheat, walking in a circle.
And what they would do is they would bring the wheat in after the harvest, put it around here, and they'd put a threshing floor back behind a donkey. They would lead it around, and it would thresh the wheat so that it would pull out the grain from the wheat. Then it would be taken over here and ground into a meal that would be used then for bread. It's fantastic being here at Nazareth Village and be able to see things like this. One of the things I like about coming here is that it brings first century Nazareth to the current age, and we can come around here and we can see these things, how they operated during the time of Christ.
They had several sheep. They had a couple of lambs. You know, they're sticking their noses out through the gate and trying to get really close and touch them and talk to them. Very calm animals. We passed by there to come to a replica first century tomb. And you see the circular stone that would have been rolled in front of the opening. Climbing into the replica tomb, it's hard to describe. You know, you're walking down into this small little cavernous space, this opening with some niches in the back, and to think about Christ's body being laid in something like that, and then having the stone rolled away without anyone helping except for the angels, and then looking from the inside out is something that we don't think about very often. What would Christ have seen for the very first time as he's looking out after the resurrection? So it's just, all those thoughts go through my head when I'm stepping through that doorway.
One of the things I appreciate coming to Nazareth Village is being able to see the character actors there in their first century outfits, doing first century activities. Seeing that helps you appreciate so many of the verses in the Bible so much more.
When we walk into the carpenter shop, I have a special attachment to that. Woodworking is something that I do for a hobby back at my house, and to see the kind of tools that Jesus would have used, that Joseph would have trained him in using, it was special. So we are at Joseph's carpentry shop. So first century replica of what Jesus would have been doing with his father, and some of the tools. So we have the drill. Could we try the drill?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So this is supposed to be a first century drill, and he was going a whole lot faster. But it's spinning. How long for each hole? 2 minutes? 5 minutes? Oh man. Yeah, I prefer my cordless at home. That is really cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. You make it look easy. You make it look easy.
Yeah.
There we go. You do it better. Joseph, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate it.
All right, I'm going to stop it there. I don't know why, but the warning bell didn't ring, and so we're going to have to go ahead and cut out because it's right at 8 o'clock. I am grabbing the link for this off of YouTube and sending it out to you now through the Remind app, so that if you want to keep watching it. I know that kind of backtracked in our story here. Jerome, could you hit those lights? I'm having trouble seeing up here. I know it kind of backtracked in the course of what we're studying, but hopefully that gives you a little context. That carpenter shop, man, I thought that was super cool. There's still some more stuff that they talk about that in that video, so you can go home and watch that. We're also going to watch one Sunday about the temptations of Jesus. They're going to show you more of the Judean wilderness that we talked about tonight, and we'll talk about Jesus' temptations on Sunday. And may try to look at some other cards in that as well as Jesus begins his ministry, starts calling his disciples, and we'll maybe try to make the distinction between the Judean ministry and the Galilean ministry. Any comments, questions, or anything like that before we dismiss class? Okay, I may come back and we might talk about this Gentile, reference to God opening up the heavens. I may get down the rabbit hole on that this week, and we might just be stuck on that Sunday, but that's okay. We're in no hurry. Appreciate everybody's comments. Y'all can go ahead and start heading out and get your kids or make your way out. I'm sending that link out to you so you can finish watching it, and thank y'all for being at class tonight. All right, you should have the link in your text. Hey, I got that cord. It came in yesterday. It's back there. What's that? There you go. Yeah, just make him come up here and do it. I like that. That sounds good. I put it back there on that. It should be on that table. Make sure I put it back there. I don't think I put it in my office. So, and if did you think we could use one of these Cat 5s to run that printer? Okay. All right. There's no rush on that. Watching those prices. Those weren't sale prices we saw. That's the actual price. So if it drops, I'm gonna grab it up.
This star means prophecy fulfilled. And you got a reference talking about it to Isaiah 42. 42. And then where it talks about hear him.
Deuteronomy.
That's a reference to Deuteronomy.
You said it's
18, 15, and 19.
15 and 19. All right.
I didn't read 19.
Yeah, that might be a sermon sometime soon. I didn't think about that side of it.
Well, I was just reading references.
Hey, that is a testament why cross references are useful, right?